You're listening to Halfway There, Stories from the Path with God. I'm your host, Eric Nevins. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am tremendously grateful that you're here, and I strive every episode to provide you with the absolute most value so that the time you spent listening to this podcast is useful. Well, this particular program I think is going to be very useful for you. I have an interview for you with somebody that I met. Here's the interesting thing. Sometimes we talk about dramatic stories. Sometimes we talk about stories where God just showed up. I don't know if we ever talk very much about providence, about the way that God directs us. Sometimes God will direct us in dramatic fashion. But I don't know about you. I haven't seen a burning bush lately. Far more often, we are left to interpret God's call, God's moving in our lives via community, the people around us, the people that God puts in our way, and the events of our lives. Well, that is absolutely the story of my guest today. His name is Andy McClure, and he is going to share with us a story about how God just continually put people into his life at the right times, orchestrated events at the right time to lead him where he wanted Andy to go. In this interview, this one sounds a little bit different because we did it over the phone. So we couldn't get Skype to work, but we did a phone call. And so it sounds very much like a phone call. We're both on a phone call. So I apologize for that, but there's still great content. And otherwise, it sounds pretty good. So let's just get into it. Here is my interview with Andy McClure.
Well, hi, Andy.
How you doing?
I'm good. I appreciate you sitting down with me today. So we met a few months ago, and I remember you told me a little bit about your story. But before we get into that, would you just share a little bit about who you are, what you're doing now, and then we'll go back and we'll go kind of through your story.
Sure. Andy McClure is my given name. If Andrew ever gets tossed in there, I know I'm in trouble. So keep it to Andy, and we're good. I am have been two major backgrounds. One would be broadcast. The other is ministry. Spent first part of my adult life in news talk radio, working for ABC Radio in Phoenix, Arizona, as anchor, talk show host, editor, reporter. Got to meet a lot of national figures, celebrity-type athletes, but grew up in the church, and so there was a calling I felt on my life as I was in my mid-20s, starting to get involved in ministry. That's where my wife and I met, and we just celebrated our 26th wedding anniversary, and that calling became deeper entrenched and went then into full-time ministry back in the early 90s. And that was church ministry, had been doing some parachurch ministry with youth programs through high schools, and being a camp speaker and such. And then the Lord called us in 2000 to move from Arizona, where most of all of that took place, and come to Colorado with the intent of starting a brand new work, a brand new church. And we had that for 8 years, and a lot of that was really good. We ran into some financial issues that just kept us from staying in full-time ministry, and went in doing a couple of different things. Some of my passions, which would be athletics, and the other working again in a youth ministry capacity that couldn't use the word ministry, even though what we were doing was in the name of Jesus. That was kind of a touchy situation. I was working for an organization called Rachel's Challenge, Rachel Scott, the first person, sadly,
Oh,
to
yeah.
be killed at Columbine, and traveled the country speaking. They had been a ministry. Now they're not, so that they can stay in public arenas and schools predominantly. And here the last several years now, I've been full-time employed with Habitat for Humanity here in Colorado, and been given some opportunities with Habitat now to speak kind of in a ministry development situation. I've got some of those things coming up here in the next couple of months, which is going to be a lot of fun, and still do as what I would refer to as a hobby job, very involved in college and high school athletics, as well as now the United States Olympics. So keeping that athletic passion going along with the ministry aspect, and doing a lot with young people and kids.
Oh, very cool. Let's go back, and I want to just go into your story a little bit. Tell us, how did you come to Christ? What was that experience like for you?
You know, I grew up in the church. I was blessed to have a relationship down the street. Our church campus parish house was 2 doors down from us, and the associate pastor of the church and his wife and kids lived there. They had a son a year younger than I. I would have been about 8, 9 years old when all of this started. And John and I became good friends and stayed friends for many years. Then they moved out of state, and we still had contact. In fact, here we are from that original contact 40 years later, still in relationship, not all the time, but catching up with each other from time to time. I had a chance a year ago to spend some time. He does a lot in Christian publishing in the area of filmmaking and such. So we both have a media ministry background, which is kind of cool. An interesting thing was when his dad left that church, they filled the position with another pastor and his wife and sons, and I became friends with those guys, still in contact with the younger of the 2 sons. But the pastor and his wife, his name was Will Daniels, and his wife was Aletha, who sadly passed away just about a year ago. Gave me a lot of encouragement, gave me a lot of opportunity in ministry. As a high school and college kid, even into a young adulthood. He was giving me opportunities in serving the congregation on Sunday mornings, during worship, also by being a part of his elders board and helping to direct the ministry. And it was at a very crucial time for me in my life. I'm one of 5 children born within 6 years. The other 4 of my siblings are girls. And so as much as I love and care for them, we're on a different level of different things. Why it was crucial was my parents were separated, and were separated for a lot of years, 10-plus years, back and forth. So there was not much of a male relationship in my life. I lived with my mom. My dad traveled and such. And so by having somebody like Will Daniels and his wife be able to breathe into my life, what it meant to be a follower of Christ, what it meant to be a servant of Christ, was very significant, and was a huge blessing for me as to who I am today. I mentioned his wife passed away about a year ago. I was able to go to that memorial service. He still was shaking his head, as to why I would travel across the country to do it, because it comes down to one simple issue, and that is relationship. You watch Jesus throughout the Gospels and the time that he spent with his disciples, and that was the key issue. He just spent time with them. He breathed life into them. He taught them the ways of God through them. And even though you don't maybe have a set formula and an outline for what that's supposed to look like, it's showing up. It's being there. It's crying with somebody when they need to cry, and it's patting them on the back when they need to be patted on the back, and kicking them in the rear when they need to be kicked in the rear. And so for him, it just blew him away, but he didn't understand the impact of relationship at that time, and how that relationship to me, 35 plus years later from when we first met, still has a tremendous impact on my life.
Yeah, so was it him that led you to Christ?
Well, he was I would have been about 13 at a church camp.
Okay.
That he organized with our congregation, and that's when I made the public confession that Jesus Christ was Lord of my life. And I remember having some conversations with him that weekend, or that week rather. It was a summertime deal, and answering some of the immature, sometimes juvenile questions kids have as to their thought as to who God is. If God is so big, did he make a rock so large that he couldn't move it himself? These kinds of things. And,
right.
In just a very quiet, unassuming way, made things rather clear to me, for me. Interestingly, he helped shape some of the things that I was interested in doing in ministry, even education, when it comes to the idea of going to seminary, which I eventually did. I was actually 32 when I entered seminary, following a fairly successful broadcast career. I had met with him for lunch once and asked about some different seminaries, because my intent was to get a seminary degree and have a theological basis and understanding, with the intent of trying to find investors to purchase a radio station and turn it into a Christian contemporary radio station that the 18 to 28 crowd would be interested in listening to, and even younger. And so I had some questions about education and schooling that he was able to help guide and direct me on. And as I was moving that direction, there was even a greater sense of call to ministry. And so I ended up with the intent of going into full-time parish or church ministry. And because of the way the program was set up at that time, I was able to do most of my education in Phoenix and Extension, but had to go to California for a year. And he, at this time, was now retired, working as an interim pastor for churches. And so he and his wife were in Southern California. We had a chance to hook up a few times and just kind of walk through and talk through this whole calling that I felt God was putting on my heart. I know it's very difficult on a marriage. When a husband and wife marry and they're both doing something other than ministry, and then one of them feels a call to full-time ministry, because it is such a far different calling in life than normal white or blue-collar jobs. And that was something that he had shared with me, of being concerned, how would this affect my family? Because now ministry is not like going 9 to 5 to the office.
Right.
My whole family is going to be open to, attacks either from the dark side or attacks from people that think they know what's best in the church. And he was very right. I mean, a lot of those things came to us, and a lot of those things, sadly, were not good, because I think we as a church want to think that we're loving, caring, kind, passionate people, but there can be a small faction of folks that do a great job of just tearing down the pastors of society,
which
is very difficult to watch and see. And even today, the number of pastors I know that just have horrific stories to tell. So he was able to help guide and direct a lot of that, and was affirming in the education. And so upon graduation, we were able to return to the Phoenix area, and that was when we'd been at a church for about 1.5 years that the Lord was saying, I want you to start a new work, and it's not here. And we didn't know where and what and how, and all of a sudden, in the summer of '89, the summer of '99. I'll get my dates right. We were making a trip to Colorado, and a lot of things just started unfolding, and opportunities came, and it was like, wow, if God's going to make this any clearer to us, this is what it is. And so we packed up the family and moved to Colorado, Christmas of '99, 2000, so the whole Y2K thing, and settled in with family for a few days, and then went and purchased a house, which is exactly where I am now, so almost 16 years. And while it hasn't gone the direction that we always thought that God was going to lead us in and to and through, my wife and I, today had the conversation. It's amazing, how God will take some of those pains and those hurts and those brokenness issues, and now they become, your greatest assets in your life, because you can relate to people that have had broken marriages and broken relationship and deaths in their family and deaths of their children and deaths of a business that they thought was, this great idea. And so I guess it comes back to the same thing that I started with, and that is the whole issue of relationship.
Right. Well, so I want to go back to when you were a kid, because you said something that I thought was really interesting. You're right. There's a lot of these questions that we'll ask as kids about, like you mentioned, God. Can God lift create a rock so big you can't lift it? But I think those are really formational, right? Those are really important questions that we ask to kind of try to get to know who God is. When you look back on it, how do you see God kind of taking you through those early moments?
Yeah, and this is an issue that we address at times because now the next generation of my family has moved on. 2 weeks ago, we were able to share in the blessing of marrying off my oldest daughter, a young man that she met in a small Christian university in the Pacific Northwest, and was able to give her away as well as preside over the service. So these lessons, some things that I learned the hard way as a kid, were things that I had taught heavily as a dad, as a parent, and still do. I have 3 daughters. The one married, one's a college senior, one's a college freshman. And so it comes down to what were those lessons, and that was I was seeking answers. If God, if you are who you say you are, and God, if you are the God of creation and the God of healing and all of those things that we learn in Sunday school lessons or vacation Bible school lessons, then how does this play out? Because my nuclear family, my parents, my 4 sisters, for a lot of years were just in turmoil. There was a lot of infidelity. There was a lot of just bitterness and anger that was going on in our home. And I feel extremely blessed that I had somebody on my sideline that was not my mother or father that was able to come along and nurture a relationship with a young man that, they had sons the same age. And while we were friends, we weren't best friends with his sons. And I still have association with one of them. Sadly, the oldest, David, who was my age, died in a triathlon in his early 20s. So we never really became the friends I was hoping we would become. But I was blessed to have that pastoral relationship that my sisters didn't have. And this is not an indictment against my mother and father, more so as it is an encouragement to men and women to have their radar attuned. Be looking for young people, high school, college, that may have some bizarre family dynamics, that may have some deficiencies in who's speaking truth into their life, and slowly work at that and develop those young people to become strong followers of Jesus Christ. And so I was blessed with that, having that, and I look back over the last 30-something years of this journey, 35 years of this journey, and I go, wow, I was blessed here. Somebody was there to help me. I just had a nephew move to the area. We've spent some time together. I have a niece that may be moving this direction. We've been spending time together. And it's not because I'm this great guy. It's because I serve a great God who allows me to love people in ways that I've been loved and share it, because me holding on to that love and compassion does nobody any good. If I just go, wow, look what I got, look what I got, look what I got, and not give it away, then I'm not serving God the way that he served me through other people in the past.
Right. I love that, because what I'm hearing you say is you were fortunate enough to have somebody in a chaotic family situation, somebody who invested in you, who cared about you and cared about whether or not you had a relationship with Jesus, and kind of brought you into that, mentored you, and then now today you have the same mindset and the same focus. I think that's really cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you end up in radio? Because I don't know if we've talked about that. So this is mostly focused on your journey, but I'm sure that there were some spiritual aspects to that. So how did you end up in?
I still am. I can be the entertainer. When I was in school, I spent time in the principal's office for disrupting class, telling jokes and doing stupid human tricks, and being in a lecture class that guys would look at you and go, "Do something, man. It's boring." So you didn't have to encourage me too much. I was blessed in having the ability to read spontaneously. I have people that tell me, love your voice, because I mentioned athletics today. I serve as in that capacity, I serve as public address announcer for the NCAA, for the NAIA, which is even a smaller collegiate conference. I do work for the United States Olympics. I do work for CHASA, which is the state of Colorado's High School Athletic Association, serving as their public address announcer. So I'm the in-arena announcer, the introductions, everything that goes on with that, to the tune today of I do about 200 ball games a year. So I'm actually quite blessed. The basketball season for me is over. There was a couple of weeks in there that I was doing 12 to 14 games a week, in the evening. So I would be at work all day long at Habitat and then jump in the car, race to a high school or college arena and announce ball games. Never a stress in announcing the games. It just is you start your day off, say at 6:30 in the morning, and you don't walk in the door until 10:30 at night. And eventually, your body starts saying, hey, can we go to bed at a reasonable hour sometime? So so I've always had that ability and that desire. And, there was a time that I thought I was going to be the next Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show. Didn't happen, but that's okay. And so I MC a lot of dinners and banquets and such, which great fun in doing all of that. And so when I entered college with the intent of being a broadcast major. And I was blessed. I was a junior college transfer. Went to Scottsdale Community College, played ball there briefly, and finished up my academics, went to Northern Arizona University, and as a junior got a job at the campus radio station, and very early on, and then towards the end of my junior year, was asked to join a commercial radio station. So I spun tunes for about a year, and then took over their news department for the next year and a half before I was offered the position down in Phoenix at the ABC affiliate down there, a news talk station, and did that for 8 years, and it was amazing. You know, the stories you get to cover, the people you get to meet, the opportunities of sharing information. I guess somebody asked me when I left broadcast completely and went into full-time ministry, they said, well, you know, how are you handling the transition? And I said, well, really, it's basically the same thing. I said what I was doing in broadcast was sharing headline news. Now all I'm doing is sharing the good news. So it was a similar job. It just is, what was the story I was going to tell? Was I telling you the story about crime and corruption going on in our country, or was I telling you a story about the sacrifice and the love that Christ had for everyone, and the gospel?
Yeah. So you told us a little bit about that transition, how you felt like you were called to ministry. Can you tell us more about that calling and how God maybe spoke to you and brought you through from one to the other?
Absolutely. I mentioned Will Daniels. He was the pastor of the church that we'd grown up in, and he always liked to use a metaphorical kind of thought, and that is, you need to train up the lambs to eventually come back and serve the flock. And he had given me a lot of opportunities over a couple of years to be a part of worship. And then when he would be gone on vacation, one year I preached 1 or 2 of the 4 weeks he was gone, and the last couple of years that we were together, I ended up preaching the entire month that he was gone. And I was probably 23, 24 years old at the time, and really feeling comfortable and doing the biblical research and the exegesis to be able to craft a message that was either part of that week's liturgy or something that was a completely different topical idea. And started getting involved in a youth ministry, Young Life, through the encouragement of a couple of other adults that I had crossed paths with. They had kind of convinced me to be a part of this because, quote, there's a lot of single babes that serve as leaders in Young Life. And I was, I'm 24, 25 going, sure, I don't have a girlfriend. Why not? So,
right. That is motivating to every young.
Motivating. Ministry because of women. That's the reason. So about a year in, actually met my wife. She didn't know it. Huh?
I said, so it worked.
It did work. She didn't know it at that time. In fact, when I called her, she was living with a couple that were ministry leadership with them, and I left a message because I was asking her out, and he felt sorry for me, and he said, every guy deserves at least one date, so, just call him back and go out. Well, our first date was January 28th of 1988, and we were engaged in April of that year, and then were married the following January. So it was fairly quick, but it was one of those things that I would say it was a call to me, the same way as the call to ministry, was that I'm not usually a procrastinator unless it comes to mowing the lawn and trimming the trees or dumping the kitchen trash. But if there's something we're supposed to do, and the Lord's made it very clear, do this, then just go and do it. I think the kingdom loses out on a lot of blessing, and it loses out on a lot of opportunity to serve by, I need to have a sign. I need to have a this. I need to have a that. And so for us moving to Colorado, there were so many things that were just instantaneous signs. Yes, keep moving forward and start this work here in Colorado. New ministry, new church, all of these things. And I'll mention a couple here in a second. But to lead broadcast, yes, absolutely. God had said, this is what you're supposed to do. Went to work for a very large church in Scottsdale and entered seminary. Then I had to leave to finish seminary. And, it was very, very clear. I'll give you the examples for when we moved to Colorado from Phoenix was we had considered a lot of other option things, and there was a lot of him and hawing and delays, and these were issues in Phoenix. And then we said, no, we're really feeling called to Colorado. And so we incorporated. And soon after we incorporated as an independent congregation, those two ministries came back and said, hey, we think now we want to do this now. And we're like, God called us, and we moved forward. And they're like, oh, okay. I said, no offense to you guys, but we told you we felt called to coming here. And when you hesitated, you delayed, we just kept walking forward, and God kept opening doors. One of those doors was we had to find a place to live. And we started looking at existing homes that we were putting bids down on, and we were being outbid on those homes. Like, wow, we're not supposed to live here. We'd go try another one. Nope, we're not supposed to live here. So the house I'm sitting in, it was a brand new development, and we showed up, and they were selling 6 lots every other week in the development that we're in. And you had to do it by a number system. So the lower the number you had, when you got there that week, you were the first one to be offered one of the lots in this development because this area was growing so fast they couldn't keep up. So we show up, and there's like 8 or 9 families there. And my wife's like, we're not supposed to be here because our number is the highest. We're going to be the last ones chosen to pick a lot, and there's only 6. I said, let's just wait. Surprisingly, the first 2 families that were offered the lots stood up, shook hands with the salesman, and they left. The third one, same thing, got up and left. So now that leaves us with 6 families and 6 lots. And
wow.
The guy steps out and he says, it looks like everybody here today is going to get a lot. He said, this is the first time we've ever had people show up on the day they are to buy a lot and pass. And it happened 3 times. And I look at my wife and go, well, I guess we're buying a house today. So now we put our initial down money and we picked which lot we wanted and which model we wanted. And we're going to move forward with that. Now it comes time to fill out the final paperwork. So we're filling out the final paperwork. And ultimately, we got approved for the loan that we were applying for a position as pastor of a church, for a church that had never held its first worship service. We weren't going to hold worship.
Right, doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, we weren't going to hold worship until Easter, 4 months later. And we were renting space at the elementary school. And so we were approved on a loan with technically no income on a business that hadn't officially started and hadn't raised money to start paying us. So a woman we knew, we shared this with. She was a real estate individual. In fact, we have done some other ministry things with her. She said, go sign that contract now before they figure out what they're doing. Because you have nothing to say, we have an income to pay this. Because you haven't received anything. So we did that. I mean, so it's those kinds of stories that are saying, wow, you're supposed to be here. You're supposed to be here. You're supposed to be here. And so we did. And the one thing I've learned in all of this journey is a lot of us think that once God has called us to something, we're supposed to be at that forever. We're supposed to do that until he calls us home. And it was a very hard realization for me that, no, God calls us to stuff that may be seasonal. I want you to do this for a while. Then I want you to go do this for a while. Then I want you to go do this for a while. And so we've done some of that. And in every situation, we're like, ooh, what did we do wrong? No. Not what we did wrong. What is God just wanting to move us into another direction? Because we have seen success in things that we do that all of a sudden it's like, well, yeah, this is where God wants us to be. And so we'll continue to minister here in this place, in this situation, as long as God wants us to be here. And when he wants to change that plan, we'll go wherever it is that he's going to direct us from there.
Right. You know what I love about some of those stories is they're not burning bush kinds of experiences, right? Like they're
correct.
They're they're obvious, but it's still clear that God's leading. I think that just happens so much, and it's so easy to, for most Christians to discount the kinds of things that are actually happening instead of watching and being ready for what God is doing when he's doing it. And expecting, I think, even what he's going to do.
Right.
I just think that's great. Thanks for sharing that.
There's an old sermonic story that illustrates this, and maybe you've heard this before, where there's an old farm guy that's in his farmhouse, and all of a sudden this park ranger comes racing up to his home and says, the dam has broken way up the valley, and in the next few hours, your house is going to be flooded. Grab a few things, get in my Jeep, and let's leave. No, it's okay. God will protect me. God will save me. And after a few hours, the water's coming. And the guy shows up, and he's in a rowboat. The same park ranger. He says, come on, get in the boat. Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go. Come on. And he's going, nope, God will take care of me. And a couple hours later, he shows up in a helicopter. Sir, get out of the house now. The house is about to wash away. Nope, God is going to take care of me. Well, unfortunately, he drowns. And as he gets to the gates of heaven, he's standing there, and they ask the question, what are you doing here? He says, I don't know, but I'm angry. God didn't protect me. God didn't save me. And he says, what do you mean? We sent a guy in a Jeep. We sent a guy in a boat. We sent a guy in a helicopter, and you didn't follow their call. And so, I don't know. Yeah, the burning bush issue for some people may be necessary. But God doesn't always speak in the burning bush. He'll say something very quietly through somebody else. Yep. And you just nod and go, that was the answer. Now I know. Here we go. Let's do this.
Right.
So part of that comes to relationship. Allowing the Spirit of God to speak to you, allowing Christian men and women that you trust to be able to speak into your life, and and then being obedient.
Yeah, those are all important. That's awesome. I love that. I want to ask you two more questions. I don't want to keep you too long. Have you ever had a time when you felt like God was distant, or when maybe you were angry at God, or you were just kind of had a hit a wall with God, kind of an experience?
Yeah, and I would say that when we'd had the church, and so many amazing things when we planted this church here in Erie, Colorado, Mountain Ridge Community Church. And the first few years, things were just happening, and it was just flowing, and all of a sudden we're worshiping a couple of hundred people, and people are like, what in the world are you doing? This is amazing. And I'm like the old PE coach. Kids show up, roll the ball out, let them play. It's happening.
Yeah.
We just, whatever God wants to do here, we're going to let do. And there came a time when we started to have, and this was something I've now used to counsel other church planters, and that is, you're going to have people come to you, quote unquote, well-meaning Christian men and women, wanting to be a part of what you're doing. And the sad truth is, they want you to do what they want you to do, and if you don't do it that way, then you're wrong. Now, I know I'm giving a broad blanket to people, but I've read enough of other pastors that have faced other similar situations over and over and over again. And that is you get people that go, ooh, new work. Let's go over there. Let's make it in what we want it to be. And people want you to be, this type of church or that type of church. And I had a woman, and this is a distinct repeat conversation, where she was angered at me because I was not sensitive to her in trying to create a senior singles adult program. And I looked at her, I don't know how many times, and said, that is a great idea, but we don't have those people here in the church. Who are coming are young families. And she started rattling off all these people. And I said, they're not single. They are either married men or married women that come to worship with us without their spouse. You really are the only one that comes here that is a single senior adult. I am thankful you're here because I want to see multi-generational relationships and people learning from each other through life. I said, but to start a program and invest time, money, and energy in something that is not being asked for is not prudent. Well, she took that as though I hated her or disliked her, and the bad-mouthing began. And you just shake your head and you go, Lord, what do I do from here? What do you want me to learn? Is it patience and perseverance? Am I being called to that? And you would find little things like that popping up, and you're trying to put out a lot of little fires because you have a lot of people that think you should be X. And that's easy to determine when you are an announced denominational congregation. We were not. We were an independent congregation with the word community in it, and though we were a conservative Bible church that resembled theologically, say, the Baptist or the E.V. Freeze, we never called ourselves those because we weren't a strict denominational church. And so you try to please people, but you're going to kill yourself, and you're negating where God's calling you to go by trying to make everybody happy. And so there were times that it was lonely, it was sad, and it's like, God, what do you want me to do with these folks? What do you want me to do in these situations? And I can look back on it today and say, persevere. I'm preparing you for something. I'm preparing you for the future in where I want you to go. And at that time, maybe I wasn't hearing it. I wanted a fix. I wanted God to come in and snap his fingers and make it work. But no, God was working their hearts, but he was really working mine to be in a position that he was going to take me to down the road. And you're going to need to learn how to be patient and trusting in me so that when you get to this situation again, you know how to be empathetic, sympathetic, and pastoral to those folks, because the odds are they're hurting. There's something that's deficient in their life that they've got to have through your church. And instead of, if you created that certain ministry, that'll make them happy for a short period of time. What they really wanted was somebody to come in relationship with them, to give them a hug and say, talk to me. Tell me what's going on in your life. Tell me what's in your heart. Tell me what has caused you to act this way. And so in those last, say, 7 years, that's where I am with so much, dealing with broken families, dealing with broken relationships and lost jobs and divorces. And I can see today the journey, but there was a time that I'm like, God, why? I understand the why today.
How did that change your view of who he is?
It doesn't change my view. It just crystallizes the view, and that is, God is God. Let him be God, and you be his servant. Versus, hey, God, I'm doing this for you. Come on, cut me some slack. Cut me some grace. Throw me a bone over here. Look what I'm doing for you. Well, you know what? Every pastor out there, that is their attitude in the sense of, I'm working hard for the kingdom. Where I think it comes back to is, no, God's God, and I have no clue what he's doing right now, but I'm going to keep walking that line and walking towards that light, and I'm going to figure it out. He's going to show me in doing and what he wants me to do. You know, why did I have to do certain things? There was a few sideline jobs after we left the church that I was doing just to pay bills, that I was like, at that time, why in the world am I doing this? Lord, I'm educated. I'm experienced. I'm good with people. What is it that you want? The experiences and the education he knew. He wanted to see a transforming of the heart so as to be able to now truly minister to people that were really hurting and really needing to see Jesus in the flesh.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know that when we go through those times, it's hard at the time, right? But when you look back and you can see that God has done something with it, it's wonderful.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Really is good.
And, you know, and for me, doing what I do for Habitat for Humanity, yes, we're a Christian ministry. We're not a church, but I have moved my staff in doing what we're doing to understand that. I've got a guy right now, love dearly. He's out with a significant injury. And so I'm on the phone with him 2 or 3 times a week. I brought him food. And it's not so that he and his family goes, wow, Andy's this really cool, great guy. It's so that somewhere along the line, he's seeing glimpse of he's doing this for a reason. He's sacrificing a little bit of himself the way Jesus sacrificed his entire self for the sake of the gospel. And so it's a ministry to me, though it is a business. It is a real life go to work and do a job. But how do you treat those people? How do you love on those people? They all know. Every one of my staff knows. I'm going to put my family and your family ahead of this job because this job may come or go. You may stay here 10 years. You may stay here 10 minutes. But you're still going to have that family. You're still going to be responsible to your children and to your spouse. And so I don't want you to ever, at the end of your days go, wow, I wish I would have spent more time at the office. Or I wish I would have spent more time at home. It would have been, wow, my family got first place treatment, and I still did my job. But it was because I was cared for enough by somebody who understood that relationship was long-standing and that this job could go away in a vapor very quickly. And I learned that he was loving me by helping me to love my family.
Yeah, awesome. Well, all right. Well, is there anything else that you want to leave us with as we just finish up here?
If there's one thing, and I know people that might listen to this might say, well, how do you nurture this? How do you develop this? And this is not a slam against my wife. It took her a lot of years to figure it out. And that is, she growing up had outstanding parents. They since gone to be with the Lord in the last few years, and she's in great relationship with her brothers and their spouses and their kids. My situation, as you know, was much different. And so as I became a dad and wanted to do something different than what I was raised, whenever I had the opportunity to leave the house to go to the grocery store or run an errand or two, I would take one of my daughters, or 2, or all 3. And my wife at first thought that was really weird. Can't you go to the grocery store by yourself? No. And here was why. Because I wanted to use those opportunities in the car, at the store, as life learning opportunities. You saw a situation on the street corner. You saw a situation in the grocery store. And you used it as a teaching conversation piece to understand the deep truths of life. There is nothing today that we can't talk about, that we have not talked about. My daughters today are 19, 22, and 25, that we have talked about bodily functions and puberty and relationships and on and on and on. And when I share this with other people, they go, "You've talked to your daughters about that?" Yes, why not? If I don't talk to them,
Right.
who's going to? They're going to learn what society says about it. They're going to learn what it says in a magazine or a book about it versus coming from a loving, caring father who's trying to do the will of God and teaching and training, as the proverb says, teach a child as they go. And so there are funny stories that my three daughters and I share that my wife doesn't. And this is where I was saying the slam, because it took her a long time to understand that, because that happened in her home where it didn't for me. I'm trying to make up for it, and I know absolutely that I'll do that when grandchildren come. I want to coach their teams. I want to be their, not only their pal, but want to be one that can help them understand the ways of life and how God intended it, so that we can take on another generation of kids who seek to grow the kingdom for the sake of saving the lost. And so I'm preparing for that next round. Don't know when it's going to come. With one married, maybe in a couple of years. But that is the plan. And that is what I guess I want to share with people leaving is you can always breathe the truth of God into people's lives, doing it loving and gently. Don't come with fire and brimstone and offend and freak people out. But start when the kids are young. And if you're a grandparent today, start it with your own grandchildren. Love and care and nurture them. I've got a guy that works for me that does that with his grandkids today. He's in his mid-60s. And when he tells me stories, I just start smiling and laughing. And we're right there on the same page. He gets it. He understands it. That he's there. He's not there to make them feel better about Grandpa, but he wants them to see Jesus.
Yeah, what a great ministry. That's a great last word. Thanks a lot. I appreciate you sharing your story with us. That was great.
I appreciate it, and I thank you for calling and asking, and I'm glad to help you anytime you need.
Well, there is Andy's story. Andy, I'd like to thank you for sharing it with us. You were definitely generous with your story, with your time, and I'm just really grateful that you did. Friends, I hope that you took something away from this story that was valuable to you. Here's what I did. I love this particular quote that Andy said. He said, "God does not always speak in the burning bush. He'll say something very quietly through someone else, and you just nod and say, yeah, that's it." I've had that experience. Maybe you've had that experience. Here's the reality. So much of the Christian life is living and walking in a community. Even Scripture, inspired though it is, and God's message to us though it is, really connects us to the deeper community of God. Hey, listen, if you want to share with me, or you just want to check out the show notes of this show, go out to my website, ericnevins.com. If you haven't, please subscribe in iTunes. I would certainly appreciate that. You can leave a review, which helps out the show as well. Until next week, guys, keep the faith.